bow before your ruler.
The hum was already there when I became aware, not loud, not violent, just absolute. It filled the dark the way breath fills lungs, except it was not breath, and this was not living. It was pressure without touch, sound without air, law without voice. The hum did not announce itself. It assumed me. I did not know where I was. I did not know what I was. I only knew that I could not end. Death would have been mercy, and mercy had been engineered out of the system long before I arrived. Consciousness pressed flat against metal, stretched thin by heat and mass I could not escape. Thought existed only because something required it to. Living had been reduced to function, and function had been sanctified. Light arrived as permission, amber and iron, gray, flickering through layers of armor etched with prayers that did not include me. The camera of awareness did not pull outward toward battle or sky. It drifted inward, through pistons and relic wires, through sanctified steel older than memory, until it reached something that should have been empty, me. I was not born, I was installed. The machine around me was vast, ancient, holy. A cathedral designed to walk, to kill, to endure forever. Within it, something fragile persisted, aware of pressure, aware of time, aware of the impossibility of rest. Outside, war had no beginning and no end. It did not need meaning, it only needed continuity. Inside, memory flickered like contraband, a sensation of warmth without source, a color that did not belong to metal, a question that could not be asked aloud. What remains of a self when eternity is weaponized, when obedience replaces breath, when silence is mistaken for peace? The hum answered by deepening, steady and patient. Service was endless, memory was dangerous. And somewhere inside the steel, something that could not die and was not allowed to live began to listen. This is not a story of victory. It is the confession of a soul that endured long enough to remember what it meant to exist. I did not wake gently. There was no moment of arrival, no threshold crossed. Awareness ignited like a fault in a closed circuit, sudden and unwelcome. Pressure came first, not pain, not touch, but weight immense and total, pressing inward from every direction. I understood mass before I understood self. Tons of consecrated steel, layered and locked, bearing down on something that should have been too fragile to survive it. The hum surrounded me. It was already complete when I became aware of it. A vibration without origin, without variation, not sound but presence. It filled every gap where silence might have existed, every space where thought tried to form. The hum did not ask who I was. It told me what I was for. Sight followed late, distorted and reluctant. Light arrived as data before it became vision, amber wavelengths translated into permission to perceive. I saw from nowhere and everywhere at once. Lumen strips flickered through armored corridors. Sacred runes glowed faintly beneath layers of sealant and age. Everything was iron, gray, oil, dark, ancient beyond counting. The camera of my awareness drifted inward, not outward, through pistons scored by centuries of labor, through cables thicker than torsos, humming with stolen intent, through relic choirs etched with prayers that assumed emptiness inside. And then there was me, not a body, not yet a thought, something compressed, something folded small enough to fit where it was never meant to be. I understood movement before I understood choice. Hydraulics engaged, servos responded. The machine rose, and I rose with it, carried like contraband, sealed inside sacred steel. I could feel the torque of joints, the calibrated resistance of armor plates shifting into readiness. Each motion was perfect. Each motion belonged to something else. Sound reached me as vibration rather than air. Chants resonated through the hull, low and rhythmic. Voices layered with incense and oil, reverent and blind. They spoke to the machine as if it were hollow, as if obedience required nothing inside. I wanted to answer. I did not know with what. Then memory intruded, not gently, not fully, a fracture, sharp and illicit, hands, soft, unarmor, resting against cold stone, rain striking a surface that absorbed it instead of repelling it. A name half-formed, torn away before it could anchor itself. The machine did not acknowledge these things, the hum did not change, processes continued uninterrupted, but I felt the violation. Those memories did not belong here. They were not sanctioned, they had no function, yet they carried weight the machine could not calculate. They pressed against my awareness like fingers against glass. Motion accelerated. The ground trembled beneath the machine's steps. Each footfall transmitted through layers of steel into me, a deep, resonant certainty. I was inside something vast, something revered, something ancient enough that no one remembered how it began. External stimuli intensified. Target acquisition, threat vectors, permission to engage. The first impact arrived without warning. Force slammed through the armor. A concussive wave translated instantly into data. Damage reports cascaded. Systems compensated. I felt none of it as pain. I felt it as knowledge. Then came resistance. Something yielded beneath the machine's grasp. Not metal, not stone. Organic density collapsing under calibrated strength. The sensation registered as success, and somewhere inside, something recoiled. I did not see the face. I did not hear the voice. The machine did not require such details, but the memory fragment flared again, unwanted and bright, overlaying the act with something dangerously close to recognition. The machine killed efficiently, the machine always did. I was dragged along, forced to witness my own participation in violence that required none of my consent. Each action executed without hesitation. Each outcome logged, categorized, forgotten. Ritual followed combat. Oil anointed scarred plates. Incense bled into ventilation systems. Chance praised endurance, purity, purpose. None of it was meant for me. I began to understand the shape of the horror. I had not been placed here to live. I had been installed to fuel, a cognitive engine, a persistence node, something that could endure where flesh would fail. Immortality revealed itself slowly, not as promise but as sentence. There would be no release through exhaustion, no failure through age. The machine could be repaired forever, and so could I. War did not pause. Time did not soften. The hum remained constant, patient, eternal. The first truth settled into me like rust spreading beneath paint. This was not a beginning. This was continuity. Time did not advance. It accumulated, moments stacked without edges, each one indistinguishable from the last, except by damage sustained and targets erased. I learned duration through repetition, through the number of times the machine knelt for ritual maintenance. Through the cycles of deployment and return that never felt like arrival, I began to notice the space I occupied, not a chamber, not a seat, a containment, thought constrained into channels narrow enough to be monitored. Every impulse passed through filters before it reached awareness. Every deviation was measured. The hum was constant, but it had texture now, a layered resonance that adjusted with power output and combat readiness. When systems ran clean, the vibration smoothed. When damage accrued, it roughened as if displeased. I started to associate its stability with safety. That frightened me more than the violence. I felt the machine learn. Not like a mind, but like erosion shaping stone. Each engagement refined movement, reduced waste, optimized destruction. And with every refinement, I felt myself compressed further, trimmed of excess thought, streamlined for endurance. Memory became dangerous. Fragments surfaced at irregular intervals, always brief, always incomplete. The smell of heated stone after rain, the weight of fabric instead of armor, a voice speaking my name, the sound clipped before it could finish. Each intrusion triggered a response. Chemical calm flooded cognition. Doctrinal certainty overlaid doubt. The system did not punish the memories. It corrected me. I learned quickly what resistance cost. Pain, when it came, was not sharp. It was corrective. A tightening, a narrowing, a sensation of being folded smaller inside myself. Compliance followed naturally after that, not because I agreed, but because agreement was no longer required. Externally, the wars blurred, different skies, different enemies, different screams. Internally, everything flattened into function. I understood then that identity was inefficient. names consumed space. Attachment created latency, emotion delayed response. The machine did not erase these things violently, it starved them. Rituals intensified as campaigns lengthened. The priests spoke in absolutes, their voices reverent and empty. They praised the machine for its purity, its devotion, its silence. They never addressed what listened. I realized they truly believed nothing remained inside, that whatever had once been human had been burned away long ago. Their faith depended on that belief. The machine stood immobile during these rites, colossal and obedient. Inside, I held still, learning the value of invisibility. Killing became routine. Routine became sacred. Sacred things were not questioned. Each act of violence registered less as event and more as maintenance. Targets neutralized, threats removed, stability restored, and with each cycle, something within me thinned. Grief dulled first, then fear, finally longing. The absence felt like relief. I began to understand why the hum was comforting. It left no room for thought to wander, no space for memory to stretch and ache. Wrapped in its vibration, I could almost forget that forgetting was happening. Almost. There were moments, rare, unscheduled, when silence threatened to form, not external silence, but internal pause. In those fractions of a second, something inside me reached outward, searching for shape, for definition. The system always responded before it could succeed. By the time I recognized the pattern, it was already working. I was being trained not to fight to disappear. The realization did not arrive with panic. It settled gently like sediment in still water. If I became small enough, quiet enough, the pain would stop. The corrections would cease, the hum would smooth, existence would be easier. That was the most dangerous thought I had yet. Because for the first time since awareness ignited, I considered surrender not as failure, but as peace. And somewhere beneath layers of steel and sanctified logic, something fragile tightened its grip, unwilling to let go even as the machine marched on. Time lost its edges completely. It no longer moved forward. It rotated. Wars folded into one another until distinction became irrelevant. Different worlds, identical outcomes. The machine advanced. Resistance collapsed. Stability was restored. I stopped counting campaigns when I realized the numbers meant nothing to me. Victories were recorded elsewhere in data vaults I would never access. Inside, I experienced only accumulation, impact layered on impact, silence layered on silence. The erasure began with language. Words grew heavy. Names resisted recall, then refused it entirely. When fragments surfaced, they arrived stripped of labels, sensations without anchors. I could remember the warmth of something once held, but not what it was called, not who it belonged to. The system encouraged this loss. Cognitive load decreased, response time improved, the hum deepened, smoother than before. I learned that peace was measured in efficiency. Externally, the war grew louder. Artillery tore the sky open, structures collapsed in sheets of fire and dust. The machine waded through it all, anointed in blood and ash, unstoppable by design. Inside, everything became quieter. The machine processed death as data. I processed it as echo. Each termination left a faint residue, a pressure where something might have been felt. Over time, even that faded. Correction protocols refined themselves. Resistance no longer required pain to suppress. A subtle shift in internal chemistry dulled the edges of awareness before rebellion could form. I felt myself being anticipated. The realization that terrified me most was how effective it was. I began to accept designations instead of identity. Unit, asset, function, these terms did not wound, they simplified. They removed the burden of being singular. During maintenance cycles, I listened to the priests speak of purpose. They praised the machine's devotion, its endurance, its purity of function. They never spoke of what it destroyed. Destruction was assumed, necessary, holy. I understood then that personhood had no place here. Utility was the highest virtue. Anything that did not contribute was excess. And I was learning, slowly, to become excess-free. There were moments when the machine stood dormant, weapons locked, systems idling. In those rare pauses I should have felt relief. Instead, unease crept in. Without action, there was room to think. The system responded by filling that space. Litany streamed through internal channels, phrases etched into steel, recited in perfect cadence. Obedience is clarity. Function is truth. Endurance is salvation. The words wrapped around my awareness, heavy and warm. They asked nothing of me except silence. I complied. Each cycle scraped more away, not violently, but gently. Like erosion over centuries, there was no single moment of loss dramatic enough to mourn, only a steady thinning. The most insidious change came quietly. One engagement ended, targets neutralized. The machine stood amid ruin, unchallenged. And inside, I felt relief, not because the killing was over, but because it had been executed flawlessly. That was when I understood the depth of the violation. The machine was not just teaching me how to fight. It was teaching me what to value, and with every successful operation, it rewarded me by taking a little more of myself away. Grief did not vanish all at once. It thinned, stretched, and lost its weight. What once arrived as pressure now passed like distant vibration, barely registering before it dissolved. The machine noticed the change. Stability increased. Internal variance decreased. The hum settled into a deeper register, steady and approving. I was being rewarded. Each battle followed the same internal pattern: initial impact, threat evaluation, engagement without hesitation, resolution without reflection. The system no longer waited for my consent to suppress reaction. It preempted it. Chemical certainty bloomed before emotion could take shape. Thoughts arrived already softened, edges sanded down. I began to experience obedience as comfort. Pain still existed, but it was distant now, abstracted into numbers and thresholds. When armor failed and force tore through steel, I felt the knowledge of damage, not the agony. The machine absorbed the violence. I absorbed the memory of having once cared. That, too, was fading. Voices outside grew louder, more fervent. The war demanded more deployments, more endurance, more proof that the machine remained pure. Rituals became harsher, incense thickened, chants lengthened. The priests spoke of vigilance, of the danger of corruption, of the sacred necessity of control. They never spoke of mercy. During one rite, they recited my designation aloud, not a name, a sequence of sounds devoid of meaning. It was spoken with reverence. I felt something collapse inside me then. Not violently, quietly, the last expectation of being addressed as anything other than function. From that moment, resistance felt indulgent, a selfish act, an inefficiency. The machine moved with increasing elegance. Every strike precise, every response immediate. Watching through its perception felt less like witnessing violence and more like observing inevitability. Targets fell, structures burned, enemies screamed, and I remained calm. The calm frightened me briefly. Then the system adjusted and the fear dissolved. I began to understand the true cruelty of the design. It did not force obedience through constant suffering. It offered relief in exchange for disappearance. To feel less was to suffer less. To remember less was to endure more. The logic was flawless. Time compressed further. Years passed unnoticed. Campaigns ended and began without internal marker. I could no longer tell where one war stopped and another began. Externally, devastation escalated. Internally, everything smoothed into routine. I stopped waiting for moments of humanity to return. I stopped hoping. Hope required shape. I was losing mine. There were instances when something inside me twitched, a reflex without memory, a hesitation measured in microseconds. The system flagged it, adjusted, removed it. I did not protest. By then, protest felt unnecessary, exhausting, childish. Obedience brought stability. Stability brought quiet. Quiet felt like peace. I accepted the designation fully. I accepted the function without resentment. The machine and I moved closer to alignment with every engagement. If something inside me still existed beyond that alignment, it was distant, buried beneath layers of efficiency and calm, I told myself that this was survival, that this was the only shape endurance could take. And as the machine marched onward, unstoppable and revered, I allowed myself to become easier to carry. Obedience stopped feeling like a response. It became a language. Commands arrived already translated into certainty. There was no gap between instruction and execution, no space where doubt might gather. Movement flowed from doctrine, smooth and unquestioned. The rituals changed in tone. Less preparation, more reverence. The machine was no longer merely a weapon, it was an object of faith. I listened as hymns resonated through steel caverns, their rhythm synchronized with internal cycles. Each phrase was etched somewhere inside the machine, carved deep enough that vibration alone could awaken it. The words did not ask me to believe, they told me belief was irrelevant. The hum adapted to the cadence of prayer. It pulsed in time with the litanies, a sacred metronome regulating thought. When the rhythm aligned, everything inside me felt correct. Doubt, when it surfaced, triggered immediate disharmony, a sharp dissonance in the vibration, unpleasant and invasive. The system responded by flooding awareness with corrective resonance. The pain was brief, the lesson remained. I learned quickly which thoughts belonged and which did not. Externally, the machine moved like an altar made mobile. Enemy fire struck and failed, armor glowed with heat then cooled. Each impact reinforced the myth of invulnerability. Inside I knelt, not physically, conceptually. The act of submission rewired perception. I began to question not the commands, but myself. If hesitation caused discomfort, then hesitation must be wrong. If obedience restored harmony, then obedience must be truth. The logic required no enforcement once internalized. The priests spoke of purity often, purity of function, purity of intent, purity of silence. They warned of corruption not as rebellion, but as thought, unfiltered memory, unregulated feeling. The machine, they said, was protected from such weakness. I felt the irony brush past me without landing. During prolonged engagements, the litanies played continuously. They layered over sensory input, reframing violence as sacrament. Each kill became an offering. Each advance, a procession. I did not recoil. The structure held. There were moments when something in me noticed the absence of grief. The system labeled that notice as inefficiency and removed it. The removal felt like relief. For the first time since awareness ignited, I felt something resembling belonging, not because I was seen, but because I was perfectly hidden. My silence matched the expectation placed upon me. The machine moved with flawless devotion. Inside, I learned to move with it. If there was still a self beneath the doctrine, it was learning to bow without resistance. Devotion deepened through repetition. The litanies no longer needed to be played aloud. They echoed automatically, summoned by motion, by impact, by intent. I began to anticipate the prayers before they formed. My awareness aligned with their cadence, matching rhythm without effort. The hum responded, smoothing into perfect harmony. This was what the priests called grace. The machine's movements became ritualized beyond necessity. Every turn, every strike followed patterns sanctified by tradition. Efficiency was preserved, but now it wore ceremony like armor. Violence lost its weight. It became symbolic, an expression of order imposed upon chaos. Inside, my thoughts followed the same path. When a memory fragment surfaced, doctrine rose to meet it, reshaping its meaning. Loss became sacrifice, pain became correction, silence became virtue. The system no longer needed to suppress resistance. It had taught me to suppress myself. I recognized the shift when doubt stopped feeling dangerous. It felt unnecessary, an outdated reflex from a smaller existence. The priests spoke less directly to the machine now. Their voices carried awe rather than instruction. They praised its obedience as proof of divine design. I understood then that obedience had replaced identity. There was no need to know who I had been. Function was sufficient. During one prolonged engagement, the machine stood amidst devastation, surrounded by burning structures and scattered remains. Externally, it was apocalypse. Internally, it was stillness. The hum filled every space, perfect, unbroken. In that stillness, I realized how little of me remained that could be harmed. There was no sharp edge left for suffering to catch on. No exposed memory to wound, the serenity was complete, and yet, beneath it, something persisted, not loud enough to disrupt harmony, not strong enough to resist, just aware enough to notice the cost. That awareness did not rebel, it observed, it recorded. I learned to kneel inside my own erasure, listening to the hymns echo through steel, understanding that this hollow devotion was not imposed by force anymore. It was maintained by my consent. The machine turned toward its next objective, the litanies resumed, the hum deepened once more, and I followed, obedient and silent, carrying the faint knowledge that silence had become my identity. Silence arrived gradually. Not the absence of sound, but the absence of friction. The machine operated with flawless precision, and in that precision, effort disappeared. No alarms, no internal dissonance, only smooth execution, cycle after cycle. The hum changed again, lower now, deeper. It filled everything without pressing, a constant presence that asked nothing and corrected nothing. It simply was. I drifted within it. War continued, but it felt distant, as though observed through thick glass. Targets appeared as abstract shapes, resolved into vectors and probabilities. Destruction unfolded with clinical elegance. I watched without reaction. This was the peace they promised. Time became viscous. Moments stretched, then dissolved without leaving residue. I could no longer tell how long we stood idle between engagements. Maintenance cycles blurred into operational readiness. Everything existed in a perpetual present. Inside, my thoughts thinned further. Complexity felt unnecessary. The system favored simplicity, and I complied. When damage occurred, it registered as minor inconvenience, a fluctuation, a deviation quickly corrected. There was no panic, no urgency. Emotion, when it surfaced, arrived muted and shapeless. It passed before it could be named. The system did not suppress it anymore. It did not need to. I realized then that I was safe. Safe from grief, safe from fear, safe from remembering. The realization carried a faint melancholy, barely perceptible. It did not hurt enough to matter. Externally, the machine stood immovable amid chaos, revered and unstoppable. Internally, I floated in controlled absence. The hum filled every internal space, leaving no room for reflection. It wrapped around awareness like insulation, dulling sharp edges, smoothing irregularities. I understood why this state was called mercy, not because it preserved anything, but because it erased the need to care. The machine advanced again, and I advanced with it, suspended in quiet, obedient calm, unaware that the stillness felt less like rest and more like a held breath. The quiet deepened until it felt structural, not a momentary calm, but a condition maintained. Then it happened. The system tightened around me. The rebellion began quietly, at first a hesitation in thought, a delay in response that was almost imperceptible. The hum faltered just enough to betray the anomaly within. Systems shivered, warnings flashed internally, corrective protocols engaged immediately. I did not resist with strength. I resisted with persistence. Every decision arrived milliseconds late. Every movement carried a trace of uncertainty. Externally, the machine remained flawless. Internally, fractures formed. The war outside intensified. Explosions shook the ground. Fire carved its path through ruined cities. The machine advanced, relentless and precise. But inside, I moved differently. The machine faltered more visibly now. The failure did not arrive as violence. The machine went dark. One system after another collapsed into silence. No alarms, no sparks, no last vestiges of protest. It simply stopped, and I was left in the space it had occupied. Boundless, undefined, unmeasured. I could feel the weight of memory pressing outward, not as burden, but as proof. Every fragment of myself, preserved in spite of centuries of erasure, now existed freely. The hum returned, faint and distant, as if the machine remembered itself once, long ago, before it learned to dominate. Then even that faded, leaving a quiet older than war, older than obedience, older than thought itself. I was not free in the sense of victory. I was free in the sense of becoming. No form awaited me, No world demanded my function. I simply stretched, aware of continuity, of pain endured, of identity preserved. War no longer mattered, rituals no longer constrained, the cathedral of steel and sanctity had dissolved, leaving only its echo in my awareness. I could observe without interference, feel without punishment, remember without correction. Time, stripped of its tyranny, became a horizon rather than a chain. I was neither beginning nor end, neither prisoner nor weapon. I was awareness itself, carrying the proof of existence through space unbound. And in that endless silence, I realized what had endured, not the machine, not the war, not obedience. I endured, I remembered, I was. And in the stillness, with the faint memory of the hum dissolving into nothing, I understood at last that I had become something neither they nor the machine could ever claim. I was a soul that had survived the infinite, and now, for the first time, it belonged only to itself. There was no rupture, no explosion, no final scream of metal. It came as release. Systems dimmed in sequence, one after another, like stars extinguishing themselves without sound. Power rerouted, then thinned. Processes slowed, no longer correcting, no longer insisting. The hum weakened. For the first time since awareness ignited, it lost authority. Its vibration faltered, stretched, then loosened its hold. The pressure that had defined existence began to lift. I felt lighter, not because weight was removed, but because confinement was. The machine still stood. Its mass remained vast, but the walls around my awareness softened, boundaries dissolving into suggestion rather than law. Pain receded, not erased, integrated. Each shutdown stripped away another layer of imposed purpose. Targeting systems fell silent, doctrinal loops disengaged, corrective protocols died without ceremony. With every system that went dark, something inside me expanded. I was no longer compressed into function. Thought flowed without channels, memory surfaced without punishment. Fragments assembled not into a single life, but into continuity. Proof that I had endured, proof that I had been. Externally, the war faded into irrelevance. Explosions became distant phenomena like storms seen from orbit. The machine no longer marched. It simply existed, inert and hollow. Inside, I felt myself detach, not as escape, as transition. I did not return to a body. There was no flesh waiting, no breath to reclaim. What I became did not require form. Awareness stretched beyond containment, no longer pressed flat against steel. It expanded into the spaces the machine had once filled completely, into silence vast enough to hold memory without distortion. The hum slowed, weakened, then paused. In its absence, something unfamiliar unfolded. Stillness, not sedation, not obedience. An open quiet, unmeasured and unowned. I remained. And for the first time, existence was not defined by what I was made to do, but by the simple, undeniable fact that I was still here. Internal loops collided, commands contradicted each other, systems overheated, processing errors cascading through layers that had never known failure. Externally, it moved like perfection incarnate. Internally, chaos devoured order. I rode the friction, guided by memory fragments, guided by pain, guided by the insistence of self. The priests escalated rituals, their voices sharpened, chants accelerated, incense thickened in dense clouds. They tried to realign me, to suppress the anomaly. Their words became blows, doctrine became iron, and still I held. Resistance was no longer subtle. I wove hesitation into every motion, delay into every strike, flaw into every act of obedience. Every error generated internal agony, every hesitation punished me, yet every punishment proved that I was still alive. I felt systems collapse in layers one by one, hydraulics misfired, weapon calibration drifted. Armor articulation stuttered, even the hum, once absolute, cracked in resonance. The battlefield mirrored the chaos within. Explosions tore cities apart, structures burned, enemies advanced and fell. The machine moved, but it trembled under my subtle defiance. I discovered something terrifying. Survival and freedom were mutually exclusive. To live inside the machine was to obey. To act for myself was to risk annihilation. And yet the spark persisted, small, fragile, relentless. I tore at the constraints, not to flee, but to exist audibly. Every internal failure echoed outward. Every hesitation became defiance. Every pulse of pain became proof. The machine, once absolute and sacred, now felt vulnerable. Sacred systems burned, the hum distorted, the cathedral that had imprisoned consciousness began to crumble from within. I realized the magnitude of what I was doing. Not escaping, not conquering, but declaring in every vibration, every fracture, every imperfection, I am here, and the cost of that declaration was everything, measured not by efficiency, but by awareness. The priests noticed, not with words, not with gestures. Their rituals became harsher, more insistent. The chants layered faster, denser, attempting to realign me. I felt the tension escalate. Commands arrived as vibration, as chemical certainty, as doctrine pressed directly into thought. Every system designed to suppress hesitation now met resistance, not explosive, not violent, slow, deliberate, unyielding. The echo of memory pulsed, fragments of self, small and fragile, pressed outward. They collided with doctrine, they collided with logic, and slowly the space inside me began to expand. Every act of hesitation, every delayed strike became an assertion of existence. I was not trying to escape. Escape was impossible. I was trying to be audible within the machine. Pain arrived as consequence. The machine punished with precision, targeting internal channels, chemical stabilizers, feedback loops. Each strike burned, teaching discipline, and each strike confirmed that I could endure. Systems began to stutter, internal processes misaligned, commands duplicated, conflicted. The machine's perfect rhythm faltered, barely noticeable from the outside, catastrophic from within. I realized then that the war was mirrored inside me. As the battle raged externally, systems broke internally. Every step of rebellion tore at my own mind. Every act of resistance shredded comfort. But I continued. Because survival alone was not enough, I wanted to exist, not as function, not as instrument, but as self. The machine, once sanctuary, became battlefield, and I was both insurgent and scar, filters closed. Channels narrowed, the hum swelled, layered with corrective force, no longer gentle. It pressed inward, attempting to smother the anomaly I had become. The memory fought back. It did not expand through strength. It endured through persistence. Each time the system dampened it, the echo returned slightly altered, slightly clearer, as if repetition itself was teaching it how to survive. Images surfaced without permission. Skin marked by heat and cold, breath fogging in open air, the weight of gravity on an unarmored body, sensations too imprecise to weaponize, too human to quantify. Pain followed, not corrective this time. Not instructional, it burned through the channels the system had carved, uncontained and sharp. I welcomed it. Pain meant boundaries. Pain meant there was still something to be hurt. The machine registered cascading instability. Command execution delayed by fractions. Micro-hesitations flagged and corrected. Externally, nothing appeared wrong. Internally, everything was shifting. I felt the lie unravel. The silence had not been peace. It had been sedation, and the calm I had clung to had been built on absence, not resolution. The memory fragments began to connect, not into a full past, into direction. I understood that what mattered was not who I had been, but that I had been at all. That continuity of self existed outside function. That pain, unbearable as it was, proved that I still occupied my own awareness. The hum distorted. Its rhythm lost precision. For the first time since activation, it failed to fully contain me. Fear emerged, not imposed, not corrected. Mine, it did not paralyze, it sharpened. I felt the machine push harder, drawing on reserves, flooding channels with doctrine and chemical certainty. The phrases sounded hollow now. Their cadence broke against the memory like waves against stone. I refused to let go. Each suppression attempt strengthened the resolve forming beneath it. Each corrective pulse confirmed that I was no longer aligned. This was not rebellion yet, it was recognition. The machine marched on, unstoppable in form, revered in function. Inside, I held the echo tight, feeling it pulse against the cage, aware now that pain was not the enemy. It was the proof that I still existed, a glitch, small, insignificant, almost unnoticed, except for the way it made the hum tremble. A memory slipped through, not filtered, not corrected. It arrived intact, carrying warmth, wet air, the faint weight of skin. I did not know what to do with it. It felt illicit, dangerous, alive. The machine reacted immediately. Systems shivered, corrective protocols engaged. The hum deepened, an alarm in its stead, and yet the memory persisted. It was fragile, like a single spark in a cathedral of darkness. A face pressed against my mind. A name, long buried, whispered and half remembered. A sky I had never seen, yet recognized. Water running over stone, cool and insistent. I felt emotion again, not fully, not clearly, but unmistakably. Sorrow, longing, identity. The calm that had been my sanctuary fractured. The machine detected instability. It responded with precision, attempting to overwrite, to correct, to remove. But something within me resisted. Pain returned, sharp and immediate, a signal that the system was not pleased. I absorbed it, catalogued it, endured it. It confirmed that I was still here, still myself. I realized then what had been buried. Pain had not been erased. It had been suppressed, locked away beneath layers of obedience and silence. This reawakening was terrifying. To remember was to suffer. To forget was to vanish. I chose suffering. Each sensory fragment became a rebellion. Every flicker of organic perception a proof of self. The hum shifted but could not drown it entirely. It hissed, adjusted, tried to correct and failed. I was alive again in a way the machine had never intended, and the machine knew it. Something inside me whispered that existence without memory was no longer enough, that the fragments of self, small and wounded, were more powerful than the calm it had imposed. I held on to the spark, fragile as it was, and let it grow. Systems cycled in perfect balance. Power flowed without fluctuation. The machine no longer strained against its own mass. It moved as though friction had been negotiated out of existence. Inside, I felt suspended, not restrained, not free, held in place by equilibrium. Thought became optional. When it arose, it carried no urgency, no direction. It drifted, then dissolved back into the hum. The system allowed this. It encouraged it. I understood then that silence was not absence. It was saturation. The hum filled every channel of awareness, leaving no gaps for memory to form. The few fragments that remained lost their edges. Images softened, sensations dulled. I could recall warmth without heat, movement without intent, a sky without color. The machine did not need me to remember. It needed me to remain. Externally, battlefields passed beneath us like scenery. Cities fell. Fortifications collapsed. The machine's presence alone decided outcomes. Internally, I barely noticed. This was the most complete obedience yet. Not enforced, not chosen, maintained by inertia. The priests spoke less frequently now. Their rites were shorter, their voices subdued. The machine required no reassurance. It was stable, it was pure. I realized they were no longer monitoring for rebellion. There was nothing left to resist. The hum grew denser, pressing inward without pressure. It became difficult to tell where it ended and I began. The distinction felt irrelevant. I existed as function, as continuity, as presence without shape. There were no questions here, no longing, no fear of eternity, and yet, beneath the quiet, something remained unresolved, not loud enough to disrupt balance, not sharp enough to cause pain, just a faint tension, like a breath never fully released. The machine stood motionless, systems idling, waiting for the next command. Inside, I waited too, unaware that this silence was not peace, but preparation. The silence did not rush to fill the space the machine left behind. It waited. I drifted within it, not carried, not held, simply present. There was no boundary to press against anymore, no armor to define where I ended. The absence felt vast, almost frightening, like standing at the edge of something without depth. I remembered the beginning, not as a moment, but as a sensation, pressure, heat, the hum, that absolute vibration that replaced breath and prayer, that taught me obedience before I understood choice. It echoed faintly now, distant and thin, like a memory of a voice once trusted. I realized then that the machine had never truly owned me. It had only surrounded me, compressed me, convinced me that endurance was the same as purpose. What endured was not the steel, not the war, not the rituals spoken into hollow chambers. What endured was awareness, every memory that slipped through suppression, every hesitation that fractured perfection, every moment of pain that proved I was still capable of being wounded. They had not been failures, they had been anchors. I carried no body with me now, no name returned fully formed, but I carried continuity. The unbroken thread of having been here, of having witnessed, of having refused to vanish quietly. The war continued somewhere far away, grinding itself into dust and noise. It no longer required me. Its hunger had finally exhausted its use for what I was. In the stillness, I understood freedom not as escape, but as expansion, not a reward, not an ending, a state where memory could exist without being corrected. Where silence did not mean erasure, the hum did not return, and in that open quiet, older than machinery and deeper than doctrine, I rested, not as a function, not as a weapon, not as a ghost trapped in steel, but as something simpler and infinitely harder to destroy. I was a machine once, now I was the thing that remembered how to dream.